future is a concept. It doesn't exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds Podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
And other things.
All right, we are here with Susan Manewich. Susan is an author. She's founder and director at the NUI Foundation and current president of the New Energy Movement. She's an expert in emotional intelligence. She was involved in a Cambrage Research Project under John Mack, as some may be familiar with. And she's also just an all-around beautiful soul. So aloha, Susan. How are you?
Aloha. I'm doing really well this evening. How are you?
Doing well. So recently, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of phenomena out there, and nothing new perhaps if you're someone who has been tuned into these realms, but it really just shows kind of like the power of the media and its effect on the consciousness of society as a whole. But the fact that it's being put out there right now at the level of intensity and by the quote unquote powers that be, that appear to be kind of encouraging the dissemination of these occurrences is where it kind of gets a little squirrely for me. And that's where I'm a little skeptical and kind of wondering like, where are they going with this? And how might this feed into some agenda that they have up their sleeves? I don't know. Maybe I'm a little overcautious in my analysis, but so what are your thoughts? Because for me, the idea of like ET life is just a no-brainer. And it's like, of course, there are otherworldly beings. And beyond that, of course, there are other dimensional beings. But for me, this is not, it's not difficult to accept. And, are they visiting us? It wouldn't surprise me. And for you, I know it's probably just like another day and another visitation. But how does one discern the true from the false these days? And do you have any insight or thoughts in regards to like what the media or powers that be are working on by pushing this to the forefront of our attention?
Yeah. Well, I think we're starting off where we need to be starting off, which is what's up, right? Like, how can you deny how can the media, the government, so to speak, whatever faction of the government, and there's multiple factions, I think, as we're continuing to realize, how all of a sudden, extraterrestrials and UFOs have become something to talk about. And to say that, that the stance that I know that you're aware of is, okay, well, they're real, and it looks like they could be a threat. I mean, if you look at the languaging of the two main people right now are Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo, and the languaging continues to err on the side of caution, threat, and saying that, well, we don't know what they are, we don't know, who they are, but there must be some grand intelligence inside of these ships that we can't match. And and it's concerning because, for a whole host of reasons. But one has to ask a question of how often have we been told the truth about anything that's come from, I will say the powers that be, maybe the powers that were, but you have to, ask yourself, like, what, there's always this presenting narrative. There's always an op that's there. I mean, to say that there historically isn't or hasn't been, I think time and time, again, it proves that there's usually another story that's happening and going on here. So, there's a righteous, gut feeling with a lot of people, even people that don't know much about this topic, that, we're not being necessarily told the truth again. So I would definitely say that that's a concern. So what is it, that they have up their sleeve? I think what I would say, I would go back here for a moment, and I can specifically tell you a conversation that I had with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was, I believe he was the sixth man to walk on the moon, Apollo 14, astronaut. And I had asked Edgar in person. I spent some time with him, and I had asked him in person. If you did you know anything about Edgar Mitchell? Has he come across your radar?
I do from you, and I've heard a
Okay.
few other people mention him, but I haven't really, kind of dove into any of his
Okay.
interviews or anything like that.
Well, I would say he was probably one of the few and maybe only astronauts that really uh, had a spiritual opening. And as he calls it, it was a samadhi experience when he came back from the moon into the Earth's atmosphere. And he really just had this sense of, we're all one. And like the one mind, connection to source as well. So he was very open, very aware. I had met him as I was coming back from a conference. There was a group that did Cosmos and Consciousness conference back in the, geez, I think it was like maybe 2007, 2011, between that time frame. And I had asked him, because he talked relatively openly about the fact that before he went to the moon, he was debriefed that there was 4 different types of ET species that NASA knew about. And so I had asked him, I said, how does the government know when people are having contact? Because I think if you remember my story from before, I don't know how much we want to get into it tonight, that I was basically taken out of school when I was 7 years old and asked about my contact. It
That's
wasn't
fascinating.
yeah, well, it was, to be truthful and honest, it was more like a kidnapping, and not, someone knocking at your door politely. It was picked up, put in a car, and asked about my contact as a 7-year-old. So obviously that stuck with me. And so I had asked Edgar, I said, how did they know? Because as you and I have talked about, I've had a lifetime of contact. I just came in with it. It's not something that I think is weird or unusual. I feel like it's literally been with me for lifetimes as well. It's just part of the relationship here on this planet. For some of us, I think there's others like me as well. And he said, geez, they've had that technology for a very long time. And I said, really? I said, because, I was a kid in the late 70s, and he said, oh yeah, they've had that technology for a very long time. So when you think about that for a moment, and you think about all of the tracking and all of the um, recorded conversations and all of the hijacking of contactees, people that have had legitimate contact in that information, and then you see how much suppression has occurred as well in this arena, regarding contact, and the ridicule, the shame. I mean, that's the big thing that they do if they're not trying to off somebody in some way, which I think was the old way that was done. Then here you go, you've got the harassment, you've got the shame. Even Chris Mellon said on an interview with Joe Rogan, if you listen carefully, when John Mack's name was brought up, and I spent time with that group when I was a kid, basically like a 21-year-old. Chris Mellon basically said about John Mack and the people that had contact. Well, they're people that are trying to make their lives, and I'm paraphrasing badly, trying to make their lives seem bigger than it actually is. that was what he said. So basically, you're going to dismiss. They're going to dismiss anybody that claims to have any real up upfront close personal knowledge about this. You're going to just completely discard them, and that's basically what they did. And either, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say that's either really bad research, it's really bad science. They're either lying or they're completely ignorant. And I highly doubt they're completely ignorant because of this fact that I do know, that Chris Mellon was a part of the To the Stars Academy along with Lou Elizondo, and so was Tom DeLonge. I'm very well aware that Tom DeLonge was trying to contact the free organization, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, that I had actually wrote a book chapter for their first volume that came out, and that was titled Beyond UFOs: The Science of Consciousness and Contact. Well, they tried to buy the contactee information, and thankfully, Ray Hernandez, who is running the organization, said, "Sorry, that's not for sale." So you see there's a history here. It's kind of like laughable. There's a history here of tracking contactees, literally like snatching as much information as possible, and then turning around and pretending like they don't exist, and then shaming and ridiculing. It's almost like I mean, I don't want to, I don't know how deep we want to get it early into this, but it's almost as if there's such a lack of creativity on their part that they have to copy and then claim some form of originality. And for those of us who are very well aware here, we see the gig, we see the game, and it's like, here we go. So what is happening, I would say, is you have a lot of people in this arena, I'll call it citizens disclosure, that are becoming much more active now as a result of this move. And as you know, that there's a report coming out allegedly about this big report about UFOs and ETs, and what it really is. And I highly doubt that we can expect to receive the truth of that. That would be my guess. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that Rogan interview in particular. That was an interesting one for sure on many levels. I actually made a post about that. I forget what it was in particular. So it was something that he said that didn't quite match up. But
yeah,
surprise, surprise, we're being lied to as usual. Yeah. And indeed, the threat narrative definitely appears to be prevailing one. So that's interesting. And real quick, and just something I wanted to ask you, we can kind of bounce around.
sure, that's fine.
But in our last conversation, I think you had alluded to like a contact experience with some beings, and the beings at some point showed you how to give life energy to a dying plant.
Sure.
And I wanted to ask you more about this. Is this like a teachable technique? Is this some kind of like energetic exchange that you had received? Was this something you'd done via like some kind of focused consciousness transmission between you and the plant? Does it work like that? Does it work on all plants? Was it specific to that plants? If you please could share anything about this, details that had occurred, I'd be really interested.
Sure. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about that moment. I when that happened, I'm trying to remember how many years ago that was. That was probably about somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago. And I had, yeah, just going back to it. So I had literally stepped out on my front porch, and there was a being that was there. It's gonna sound strange. Like I could see the ship coming in, and there was a being that was there, and this being asked me if I wanted to see them, to look at their face, and I said yes at first, and then I said no, 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 no. I wasn't ready, and they're like, okay, they're so patient, and uh, and they didn't, and because I had a fear of being able to see them, because I, in from what I could tell and understand, they looked just different than us, and I was concerned that I wasn't going to be able to kind of get this energetic and information exchange. Like, there's always, it's not just like, hey, a meet and greet. When this happens, it's more like there's a much higher level purpose, so you focus on that versus any of the physical, I guess, I don't know, characteristics. So I said, okay, I'm not ready to see. And then the next thing I remember is I closed my eyes, and I had this energy roll up my body, almost like rings, like a spiral ring, where it was wider on the bottom and then became more narrow on the top. And it just went through the bottom of my feet and circulated around, through like a spiral through the top of my head. And then it was just like innate. The next thing I knew is I was able to more readily feel energy coming in from my left hand and going out of my right hand. And just even as I say that now, like I can feel it. And then I just innately knew to take my right hand, and there was a hibiscus tree that was in my house, and it wasn't doing well. and just give the energy to the plant. And the plant started to have life force. So it felt like it was a life force, not exchange, because in exchange you're giving and taking something. It felt like a life force connection that is in me, and it took me
like a transference.
transference. Yes, that's the right word. That is the right word. And it took me years. When I say years, like a good couple of years, maybe about 3 to 5 years to develop. I was pretty shy. So like I would never sing in front of people. I would never, like, how do I explain it? I would never go and put my hands over someone and say, oh, let me put my hands over you. I was very shy. Uh, People didn't see me as shy, but I was really shy when it came to the things that were greatly and deeply sacred to me. I really held that in. So it was a couple of years afterwards that I felt like I was ready to help and to um, help other people. And I started out with friends and family. And I just asked my family. I created a healing part of my house. It was the healing room, healing space. I set it up, and I just started to this process that came in, and it was all very innate. And worked on people for about 45 minutes to an hour. And people would say, well, what is this, Reiki? And I'd say, no, it's alignment. I'm helping to align you to natural life force that we're supposed to be connected to for this planetary shift. And that's what it felt like that was
Some
coming through
fortunate
me.
family members of yours.
Oh yeah, I remember working on my nephew's wife, who was pregnant at the time. I always thought that was such a beautiful treat. She was open, and I just was so appreciative of the level of trust there, right? Like,
Wow.
and so sacred. It's just a very sacred, oh, and very, very delicate and very beautiful. And honestly, it was one of the most it's God's honest truth. It was one of the most enjoyable times of my life, because I was, whenever I did that, I wouldn't even call it work. Whenever I did that process, I was always in this really gorgeous state of connection of this life force, just constantly moving through and transferring. And
Yeah. And
so,
has it
that,
since
yeah,
dissipated, or does it come and go,
no,
or?
no, it comes and goes. And when there is a need for it, like especially with family, I'll I'll help and work on people as they ask, and as the mood strikes. It's almost like they have to ask, as opposed to me offering. There's this balance. I find that with people that are very stressed,
Mm.
and there's a lot of high energy moving, and there's a lot of blockages, that's when, like, it comes out. And actually, I was working on a friend in at my house many years ago, and I actually had these red marks come out of my hand because the level of intensity was so powerful. And
Wow.
yeah, and she's a really good friend of mine, and we've stayed close and connected. And she talks about that moment of what she felt and how much more open she was afterwards. So, that is, yeah, I look
Yeah.
at, like, there's a toolkit here, and it comes out when it needs to. And I'm referring to these things lately is these are adaptive abilities, meaning that, like, I just want to come out and say this because I do genuinely feel this about myself. Like, I'm not special or different because of this. This is an adaptive ability that's like part of this toolkit that is here through us and through some of us to help, um, this time that we're in. And I would, to be honest with you, I'd love
That-
to do this more often. And and
Definitely.
yeah, so you can ask me more about it. I could share more if you'd like.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah, I want to get back to that.
Okay.
but you have a strong connection with Egypt as well, I believe. And you actually just got back from Egypt. And so
Mhm.
I'm wondering either there or elsewhere, kind of between even the last time we talked up until now, have you had any interesting interactions with any beings or moments of resonating with the earth in any special way, or any like kind of insightful moments of significance that you just think might be like interesting to share with people that are any?
Yeah, how about an hour before this call? Um,
Okay.
yeah, no, yes, okay, so there's a couple of points to your question. It was, I'm slow on the take on certain things. I went to Egypt last year, about February, March of 2020, and I actually just really started posting about that because there's a stronger energy that's come in regards to Egypt. And again, I'm sure for some of your viewers, as people are talking about, their experiences and things like that, people say, "Oh my goodness, this sounds far fetched." But I innately came in, connected to um, these subtle realms and innately remembered some memories of Egypt in a prior lifetime, actually two to be exact. And the irony is, when I went to Egypt, there's a memory that I have of what I look like there. And it's very different than, all of the drawings that you see, like us Westerners typically see of what Egypt looks like and Egyptians look like, that were there during that time. And then sure enough, there's there's a glyph on the wall that is exactly to a T what I remember. And I never studied Egypt growing up. There was nothing like that. Like I didn't have this fascination. It was just almost understood that there's like this canvas of color that you come in with, and that was one of the colors on the canvas was Egypt. So there's a lot that has to do with let me see if I can say this and it sound coherent, because it's the first time I'm really verbalizing this. Uh, the memories that I have there previously were to set there was a time when those pyramids and the glyphs and everything that is incredible there was being created. There was such a strong connection to source and to life force, and I mean you see it throughout, so much of these ancient structures, right? And this reverence for the sun, this reverence for the connection to life force and in its various forms, plants, animals, um, fertility. And my sense in even one of those past lives is that I would be returning at a point in time when the planet would need this and would need this to be activated. So my sense is, the sun that we are experiencing now is an activator for a lot of these codes and a lot of these um, previous lifetimes that were here to be needed now, um, on this planet. I mean, as you can see, we're there's a lot of not so great things that are happening, and there's this distortion of life force, in so many different ways, and it's almost like it's a struggle on a day-to-day basis, for the average person to find coherency, right? To find coherency with life force, with nature, with source. And those
Yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, no, keep going. Sorry. I was
I was just oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
so yeah, well, actually, it's kind of interesting. You said that kind of gets into like another question I had, because like you had mentioned a few times, it does seem that humanity is shifting, and I think that's definitely the case. I definitely see like an evolution, although simultaneously kind of like a de-evolution on some levels, it seems.
Yeah.
Uh, and I don't want to assume, but I think you kind of allude to things like on a global consciousness level. But either way, from my vantage point, what rings true to me personally, as kind of my own thinking has evolved, like where I'm at now, and what I've come to accept, the more and more I get into things like ether physics or alchemy or astrology or natural science, the more and more I find validation that essentially all is one, like all is oneness that has over time multiplied itself into a multitude of complexities of consciousness nodes and expressions of infinite varieties in order to kind of like dance with itself and make its like make its music. And I don't know what stage we are at in this process, or in this process of divine composition necessarily, or where we're heading exactly in terms of our earthly humanity. But I do feel extremely confident that, like, for better or worse, the cosmic forces, the luminaries, the stars, the galactic center, um, all of the seemingly external entities of light, these material, spiritual, ethereal, plasmatic bodies out there in the cosmos, I do without a doubt think that they all have an energetic influence that definitely facilitates like an evolutionary or adaptive response within all of us and all the life forms here on Earth. And it's debatable to what extent this occurs precisely, but I want to know from your perspective, like how do you view these evolutionary changes? And this probably, I think this kind of ties into what you were just talking about. You've previously alluded to, like, that stuff, and how do you view them in tandem with changes that are happening technologically with things like, say, like CRISPR gene editing technologies, or like satellite technologies like Starlink that Elon Musk is putting up there? Because part of me is like, yeah, I love some awesome internet, but the other part is like, well, maybe if we didn't have such an overwhelming abundance of frequencies bombarding us and drowning out the ether, we would be able to facilitate and accelerate it like in a more organic state of evolution. And who knows, maybe develop mental faculties that would morph into some more like psychic forms of communication, or to things like you're talking about with the plant healing capabilities. I don't know, but what
Right.
what are your thoughts on all that?
I think that's excellent. I think you're on target with this. You're completely on target. My sense is this. Because I asked myself, it's like, how what is the adaptive function for me remembering past lives? Okay, other than, oh, people think it's interesting. Like, I don't even talk much, but I think this is the first time in an interview I've actually spoken about this, because it's time now. It's time not to hide that part. It's time to just let it go, because
Amen to
there's an
that.
adaptive yeah, yeah, an adaptive reason for it. There's something adaptive about it. And when I use the term adaptive, what I mean is there's a need, right? It's like I keep referring to it, it's part of the toolkit. And that toolkit is here to help, to move us forward. And I think you're right. I look at this and go, I do believe we're in the midst of Kaliyuga. You're in the midst of this massive breakdown of fragmentation. And what is the breakdown? The breakdown is this disconnection from God. This disconnection from source, this disconnection from spirit, the fragmentation, the massive focus of ego, the energy in the ego. And that disconnection, I mean, people can say, well, that's, the negative life force, because the ego can never be fed fully, right? Like, it's always hungry, it's always needing more, needing more, needing more. And that seems to be, where we're at. And if you can't feed the ego, then what do you do? Well, if you can't feed the ego properly, what's next? Well, let's start editing genes. Let's, and not look at the morality issue, not look at what the life force issue, not look at the yin wisdom that is there. Let's be over scientific. Let's be so scientific that we have no concept, again, of what morality is. And again, same thing with Starlink. What is that doing to even just viewing the stars at night? How many people, when they see Starlink, have you seen it, by the way, out your window in your backyard? Have you seen the Starlink link?
I may have. I'm not
Okay.
certain. I've seen some things that definitely may have been that.
Okay.
But
All right. Well, what can I tell you the calls that I get when people see Starlink?
yes,
I'm
please.
like, I'm
I bet
like,
you get many.
I get some, and like, oh my God, Susie, have you seen? I'm like, yeah, just check Starlink tracker, and you can, you can tell because it looks
Oh,
like a
okay. So
string of pearls.
so there's something you could actually look up. Like, there's a tracker that you
Mhm.
can.
Yep,
Okay.
there's a tracker, and I will admit that actually I won't get into that experience, but there was something that occurred like an intuitive hit, and then I looked up in the sky and I saw this. I saw these series of ships. I thought there were ships at first, and then I was like, ah, okay, so this is helping me to train my eye on what this is, and it was very, very helpful. But getting back to kind of the bigger story here, you know, when you also look at some of the research on, I'm a big fan of researching the collective understanding regarding these experiences. I think
Mhm.
coming from people who've had them, and my big question was always, okay, I know what I've experienced and what I experience. What about everybody else? What is the reason they're having their encounters? What do they think? And I did research with about 20 people that I know are contactees, and their friends also, and they weren't really having the same type of conversation or understanding. And I said, all right, well, I can't get 20 people in a room. That's just going to be too cumbersome. Let me create a survey, have it be pretty in depth, and ask some questions in regards to this planetary shift and what do they think their role is, what's happening and going on. And is really interesting information that came up, and again in regards to this planetary shift. And what they saw as the biggest threats were AI and the vaccine, pharmaceutical, or lack of health sovereignty. So and also shortages of food, water, as it relates to the changing climate. So those were some of the big issues that were there. So we have this breakdown occurring. You have, organizational breakdown, you've got the veils that are being lifted, and you also have this magnetic shift that's on the planet. I mean, you have the electromagnetic, but the magnetic shift that seems to be, and I have no research on this, but that seems to be literally kind of like stripping away um, aspects of people that z- like within themselves that they probably need to deal with but don't want to. And so what do? You run to the ego even harder. So you're starting to see some really kooky behavior on behalf of people. Not everybody. You've got some people that are uh, maturing and growing through these times, and you have other people that are doubling down and gripping down harder in this material world, a la the ego. So you've got both, like you said. And at the same time, it's perfect, because if we didn't have this, then the wake up would be a lot slower. And it seems to me that these planetary changes are happening more rapidly. They're happening and with greater intensity. And that's just part of this whole process right now. So it's also forcing people to make a decision. Are you seeing the impact of AI and what could be one's future? What does it mean to have an mRNA vaccine? What does it mean to be able to heal oneself of a disease, or being sick, or to use more natural remedies? So you know so much has happened in the last year that it's almost like seeing, where do people sit? What side of the fence are they sitting on? What are they moving to, and what are they moving away from? Are they following, the mainstream narrative, or are they actually thinking for themselves? And that's what, to me, that's what we're seeing. One of the pieces that I want to tie in with the collective contactee research is when people talked about their experience with the grays. Now, the grays is a very general term, which I actually don't like because that's like saying all of the grays have this one thing. I don't think it works like that. But people referred to some of the grays that they've experienced as being able to come back from the future, and saying we became, as as human beings, we're coming back. We became so technologized that we lost our capacity for human emotion. So please do not go down this road. So that's a message that a lot of contactees have received. And you have people that advocate for at least a wise use of AI, if not making sure that it doesn't, get into controlling human behavior. So that is something that I think is really important to pay attention to, because what does it mean to be human? And we still have not tapped into, and there's this woman that I know who wrote a great book on exoconsciousness. Um, what does it really mean to be an exoconscious human being? And what is exoconscious? It's using these innate abilities that we actually do have if we are able and given the space to develop them. That's like, the example is me with that being and that energy transfer, and then working on my friends and family. That is exoconsciousness. The capacity to know how to heal oneself is exoconsciousness. The capacity to travel astrally, that's exoconsciousness. Telepathic communication, that's exoconsciousness. So we have yet to even come close to fully exploring these gifts and abilities that do seem to also have a moral compass and like a primordial moral essence to them than the AI piece. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps, because that's that is what will get us to really be able to move through this planetary shift and actually be a more advanced civilization.
Yeah, definitely. And back to like this notion of oneness and all from one. I often think about we were just bringing up like the downsides of these technologies and stuff like this, and also on the notion of morality. But then it's like, what is natural versus unnatural? If it's all from source or from God,
Right.
is it playing out just as intended? Are the entities or beings, both human and non-human, that
Hmm.
have quote unquote fallen to error, that are perpetuating things like anger, fear, hatred, deception, do they know not what
Hmm.
they do? Is there a conscious and aware deliberate force or forces whose sole purpose and function it is to act as corruption and destruction, like as the adversary? And was this a choice on the part of the creator, on the part of source, in order to maybe allow for the spectrum of experience to exist as it does? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody should have their own thoughts on that, because that's just like, that's the exciting part of what it means to, you know, be an aware, conscious person and ask yourself that question, right? So,
Definitely.
um, you've got your idea of what that is, and my idea of that is, as someone who remembers coming from source and not losing that connection, I still don't entirely know. What I feel is that that we yes, that everything is source, even even Bill Gates is source, even
Even
who
Fauci up to source.
even Fauci. Yeah, exactly. That is all source. And I think that is also one of the ways to keep your heart light, is to realize that when you
Absolutely.
have that really right, because when you have that, when you really have that realization, because then you're not fragmented. When you have that
Hmm.
realization, you're not fragmented. You're like, aha, okay, yeah, got it. um So I do believe it all is, and I do believe in these cycles of time. I believe that, as the species on this planet, for however long we're able to be here, meaning the species, right, the human species, and it does appear we've had a number of different species on planet Earth, and then you've got these cataclysms that happen. I call it just like the Earth kind of says, okay, time for a shift up, and what I- not what, but how is evolution going to occur now? Do you get reborn into, a lower realm that's harder, or are you able to up level and move into a higher realm that becomes a little bit, more enjoyable and more agile and more loving, because it does seem to be, and again, I'm going to talk about the contactee research. Every person in that contactee research, what are the beings trying to communicate? And I'm referring to people's benevolent experiences. There is a small fraction of people that have not had good experiences. It's very, very small, though. It's like something in like the 5 to 7% range. But those people that had the benevolent experiences will say love. That is the primary thing. That you see yourself and you feel yourself as connected to everything, um, and to have love for your fellow brothers and sisters, for the planet, for yourself, for your family, to forgive. Like, that is the what seems to be this big lesson here. So,
Definitely.
when we look at this yeah, and when we look at this huge play that's happening right now, it's kind of easy to see. Well, I think it is, kind of easy to see when there's that lack of love, you have fragmentation. And when you have that fragmentation, you have fear and you have control, you have all of those, really lower vibrational energies that are at play, that they can be very smart, they can be very intelligent, but they're not going to be from a loving space. And we see what that causes. So I sometimes look and go, I think Earth is really this mega, learning place, and Dolores Cannon would talk about that. It's this mega learning place for souls to grow and evolve, and we seem to be at that point of time of graduation. Are we going to graduate or not? And I don't think that that is a collective. I think that is an individual.
Individual.
um yes, very much
Definitely.
so, because there are some folks that, I was having this conversation the other day with someone. There's folks that do not believe that that's happening, and maybe it's not happening for them. Maybe graduation time is not. Maybe they're still in, 10th grade, and they're not in their senior year, and that's okay too. But for those of us who are here, we feel like it's our senior year. you know um
Celebrate.
yeah, time to move the tassel to the other side.
Yes, indeed. And you'd brought up those cycles of time, like the Kali Yuga in particular that we find ourselves
Hmm.
in currently, I believe described in the Mahabharata, I believe. Do what's next? Do they talk about that within any of the research that you've done? Is there another
Hmm.
cycle that comes after that? And if so, what does that entail to your knowledge?
Yeah, so this seems to be, it seems to be connected to these solar changes. And then you think about, again, look at all the ancient civilizations and how much they revered the sun, right? Especially Egyptian. Um, that it does appear to be related to our sun, which is connected to the central sun, and maybe even connected to source. And somebody even said to me the other day, they said, well, think about, Jesus was referred to the Son of God, the Son, not meaning gender, but the actual sun, that lights up our earth. So it does appear to be related to that. And I've followed space weather for 15 years, because I started to realize that I could feel the sun when it became super active. And I'm like, oh man, what is this for? Like, what is this all about? And it again, I think another adaptive ability here to um, be in relationship to these changes, because who knows, there may be a time that the grid is not available, that the internet's not available. So you need to know what's happening happening and going on. But it does appear that, who knows whether it's a flare, a micronova, a supernova, a galactic superwave, don't know. But these pulses that are coming in is changing the magnetic field around the planet. The Earth's magnetic field is changing. The planets within our solar system are changing. And it just looks like this is another cycle in time. And that research that I did with people, I call it my intimate contactee research. Pretty much everybody said that we'll be going to a much higher vibrational place when this shift occurs. Some people call it the fifth dimension. Some people don't have a label for it, but they know that it's almost like I'll call it the graduation party. And that's where people believe that we're going next. And it does also appear that the I call them extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings, and these ships have something to do with helping us through this time. Not everybody may need to have that type of assistance, but there may be some that need to have that type of assistance. And I can, also tell you that some people feel it's their job to help people on the ships when the time comes. Now, that could be geographic specific, it may be something else specific. I don't know, but that's that's something that comes up, and it's also one of the reasons that it's really critical for people during these times to really be in that state of love and to really know what that feels like, because in order to really be resonant with these changes and maybe even the assistance that will come with these changes, to know what that feels like. And you asked me earlier, it's almost like, how do you discern from something that's not good to something that is good? It's no different than, like, let's say you're walking down the street and you see a dog, right? And when the dogs are friendly, what that feels like versus when the dog is aggro. And my sense is something that has benevolence is going to feel like that friendly dog, and you'll feel that. But you have to be able to get um, almost like the bandwidth within your central nervous system to be able to handle that energy. I hope I haven't gone off too far here, but I do think the time is now to be able to share and discuss this, because I think we're going to be hearing a very different narrative from the media very soon on this stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think just like you said, I think it'd be wise to do what you can to kind of tune into that intuitive faculty that we all have, and that it seems that we often, unfortunately, tend to get disconnected with through various forms of technology or distractions or who knows what. But yeah, overall, I think that's a super positive notion, though, and I like it with what you just said.
Mm.
I know we're already almost at an hour. It flew by. I do have maybe one more question or
Okay,
so,
sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah,
I was
please.
just curious, it's kind of like a question about like AI, like with like sentience and sentient beingness. Do you think it's possible for sentience to be created, or maybe like, do you think that some kind of man-made vehicle or vessel can be designed or developed that then would allow for a sentient conscious being to come into and inhabit? And then could this be potentially dangerous? What are your thoughts about like that kind of stuff?
Well, I think about that often because, um, like when you ask me what's next, I do think what's next is that we can be the expression of God, and God is a creator being, and that is something within us that we have as the capacity to create. And as you see, there's lots of different creations, right? And when you talk about like the image of God and all the different creations in the image of God, I mean, look at how much diversity alone we have on this planet. And by the way, my daughter studies marine sciences, and I asked her, she's in college now, and I asked her, I said, so here's a question. I go, are there actually more species underwater than there are on Earth? And she goes, oh yeah. And I said, like a lot more? She goes, oh yeah, Mom, a lot more. And I thought, wow, look at that, right? Like it blew me away. So
Pretty trippy to think about.
isn't that
And
trippy to
especially when you think about the Earth is pretty much the majority of it is covered with water.
I know. I know. And I'm like, and then she talks about the different species that are at the deepest depths of the ocean, and that they generate their own light. They're bioluminescent. They generate their own light because they don't have light, so they generate their own. I thought that was fascinating, right? And totally fascinating. So the reason that I bring that up is if we have within us the capacity to create, who's to say that creation is of but positive or negative, right? Like, who's to say? I guess the level of continued creation or destruction that goes along with it, that maybe that's the telltale sign of, are you creating like, for example, like when you talk about free energy, you have to be careful. What are you creating? What is the impact? Are you generating power that's actually causing some type of a harmful effect to the environment around you, or the power that you're creating is creating a positive effect in your environment? So I think when we talk about creation, I think again there's many tools that we can utilize. And like, I have friends that work with AI, that are very evolved people. So I do think that there can be some benevolent uses to it, but it also seems that there needs to be a holistic, balanced yin and yang within people that are working on these to probably create something that actually has a true adaptive use and not one that's destructive. And I'm just going to share this piece for a moment because I think this is, again, important. When the atomic bombs went off, a lot of us in this UFO ET community are very well aware that it's almost like there was a ripple that was sent throughout space, that like it flagged, the neighbors, from near and far away, to come and go, okay, what's going on here? This somebody created something that is having a pretty nasty effect in hurting harmony, and maybe even hurting a whole fabric of life, that the others can't see. So, think about that for a moment. That wasn't AI, so to speak, but it was doing something that was destroying life force, that may never be able to be recreated back. So, I look at it and say, well, what is the outcome of it? Is it something that is destroying life force, or is it enhancing life force? And every uh, contactee that I personally know, they're on this planet to enhance life force, to remove negative entities, to plant, to grow food, to create healing, to up level, to create higher vibration. So, when you look at that relationship, you say, okay, this is about enhancing life force, connecting life force, and having more life force, where what is something that's connected to AI? What is that actually doing to life force? Maybe that's the question to ask.
Definitely, those are great points. Yeah, I think everything ultimately can be used for positive or for negative, and I think
Mm-hmm.
with technology, it's same thing. It's how it's being used, and is it facilitating life force like you spoke of, or is it destructive to life force?
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Closing thoughts. I know that earlier I'd asked you if you had had any new or interesting experiences since we last talked. I don't know if we got
Yeah.
to that, and I don't know if you have time or want to get to that now.
Sure.
It's definitely welcome.
Yeah. Well, I think this is something that, yes, thank you. I will. I think this is something that probably a lot of people can relate to. It seems like the relationship from the earth to the sun, or sun to the earth, is almost like a breath in and a breath out. And there's times that I think people are feeling this deep squeeze and then this release. I don't know if you've been experiencing that or your loved ones, but a lot of people that I know
It
are.
resonates with me.
All right. Yeah. Like sometimes you feel like, oh my God, am I losing it? Right. Like what's going on? Sometimes you feel like life doesn't feel real. You may feel a little out of body. You may feel tension or anxiety. Like there's a lot that keeps, shifting and going on here. And I would say that that's actually normal to be feeling that. And um, that seems to be something is changing within us. Our bodies are changing, the structure of our bodies are changing. And my sense is that's creating more space for us to have a more effective and successful shift here. So, for people to just keep going with that. It may be difficult, but keep moving, keep going with it, and have a support group that you can communicate with about these shifts and changes. And I think the last time that we spoke, one of the things that was really cool for me to experience was wow, I didn't even realize it was the same person. A family member of mine asked, she's like, "Do you think it's possible if I could see a ship one night?" And she's got two kids, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "But let's, feel into the timing of it and see how this goes." So she came over one night with the kids, and I made a really nice dinner, and I just innately did some connection at the table. We say grace, and to me that was part of the connection. And I worked on just kind of energetically connecting everybody at the table, even on a deeper level while we were eating. And then we went out that night in the backyard here, and we played. We had a great time, and started a fire in the fire pit. And within really a couple of minutes, the kids were pointing out. They're like, "Is that one right there?" And they hadn't done this before. And so there was probably about 6 or 7 really obvious ships that we saw, and the cool thing that happened was, one of the ships, as I sang, like, I again, don't sing out loud, but this was, like, just kind of playing along, like, the more I raised my tone, the ship lit up, and as I quieted my tone, it went down, and as I lit my tone back up, it was in 100% complete resonance.
You're like the
And
ship whisperer.
it was, yeah, but yes, I guess so, right? But it was so cool because I knew this wasn't for me. I was just a conduit, right? Like, and I like that role because it's like, keep it clean, keep it simple, like nature, just breath in, breath out. And then the next thing I know, there's another one, and she has her own communication going with it. And she's asking me all these questions. I said, "No, no, this is for you. This might be, who knows what you're connected to in your cosmic DNA, because I believe that all of us have our own cosmic DNA that we're connected to. I think I came here with a more intact memory to help other people remember their own connection. Um, that to me is what this whole thing is about. Like, I feel like I'm like the ripple effect in some different, some way, shape, or form. And that was a really profound experience for her and the kids. And as a result, after months that have gone by, I can definitely see what I would call like this deep connection that she has to source, and innately has a gut instinct about how she should be directing things in her life. And I do think that that experience like literally provided a pretty big awakening for her. So, you know, that's probably something, to share and with you, that is possible for people to have. And I think if you want to have the experience and just seeing and having, a ship interact with you, you can. And is it a ship, or is it don't know, light. I'll say a ship because it moves in the sky and it powers up and it powers down, and it works, in complete alignment with your thoughts and your heart. So definitely, this wasn't of the mind; it was really of the heart, and being in a really joyful and almost playful state, in a really loving state that created that experience, if you ask me. And there was, I don't know, probably about 8 people that saw it. So
Well, that's
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Are there any last closing statements or thoughts before we close out that you would like to leave the listeners on?
Just that I'm grateful for your questions, and I'm grateful to have this space to communicate more freely, because certainly in the world that we live in right now, liberal communication, in terms of free speech seems to be hard to come by these days. So thank you for being
Yes.
so open and curious and allowing me the space to share things I don't think I've shared before. So thank you.
Definitely. It's always a pleasure. And then did you want to point anybody in any particular direction as far as any websites or any way to get a hold of you if you would like that or not? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's still going strong is the Hidden Energy book. It's now in 2 different languages other than English. It's in Spanish and Dutch. So you can go to Amazon and find that, and also Friesen's Press. So it's called Hidden Energy, by Susan Manewich and Jean Manning. And you can find me through either the NUI Foundation, or New Energy Movement. So both of those are still active, and I'll be coming out with a little bit more with some other groups that we're partnering with in the next couple of months. So some really great things that are
Things
on
to look
on the
forward to.
horizon.
Definitely.
Yes, I would very much look forward to chatting with you in a couple of months once this stuff comes out, or maybe having even some of the people that I work with chat with you as well.
That sounds great. All right. Thank you, Susan.